Tuesday afternoon, 4 p.m. in Central Europe, and it's Space Cafe WebTalk time. Our Space Cafe WebTalk, 33 minutes with Dr. Jana Robinson, will begin very soon. I'm here in Lausanne today preparing for the LEO Kinetic Space Safety Workshop at the EPFL, so forgive me that I'm not in our wonderful home studio as usually here in a reasonable hotel room. Yeah. So thank you for joining us for our talk today about economic and financial dimensions of space security. As always, we appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback. SpaceWatch.Global, as many of you know, is a Europe-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. And I would like to thank all our private and corporate supporters that showed their commitment to keeping our independent journalism alive. We really appreciate that. And I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and Space Cafe podcast. The last one featured Geraldine Najar from ESA about the commercialization of ESA and why ESA might just be waiting for your job application. For all of our fans of more audio content, we have new episodes in the Space Cafe radio, and very successful ones, I have to say. I'm really pleased to say Declan, Genley, Anne Ansland, or Holger Krag are the latest ones, and they really are top-notch, and we have hundreds of hits on them already. So we also keep our fan shop open online for you to support us actively and become a real space watcher. And if you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our website in the event section and on YouTube. Today, my guest is someone I admire for her sharp and very precise analytical skills. In 2019, I had the pleasure to meet her in Prague while she and her great team run the Space Security Conference. That was truly a big and in-depth event and just perfectly organized. And later today, we will talk about this year's edition. And with that, a very warm welcome, Dr. Jana Robinson, to our Space Cafe today. So let me introduce you to our audience a bit more. So Jana became Managing Director of the Prague Security Studies Institute in April 2020. She also served at PSSI's Space Security Program Director, a post she assumed in 2015 already, and she previously held the positions of the Space Policy Officer at the European External Action Services in Brussels, as well as the Space Security Advisor for the Czech Foreign Ministry. Beside that, Jana held positions at ESPI, ESA, IISL, IAA, CSIS, and many more abbreviations we all are so familiar with. She held also a PhD in the field of space security from the Charles University Faculty of Social Science, Institute of Political Studies, and received 2 MA degrees from the George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs and Palacky University in Olomouc recently, respectively. And she is a fellow ISU alumni, I can say. Welcome again, Jana, to our show today. Let's kick it off. So in 2021, PSSI was ranked as number 4 in think tanks in Central and Eastern Europe category. Tell us more about the organization and this achievement.
Well, thank you, Torsten. And first, thanks very much for your kind words with regard to our 2019 Space Security Conference, as well as your kind introduction. I'm delighted to be here today, and I look forward to our exchanges. Prague Security Studies Institute is a nonprofit, non-governmental public policy organization founded in early 2002. So indeed, the Institute celebrates 20th anniversary this year. Our main mission is to help safeguard and strengthen the freedoms and democratic institutions in Central and Eastern Europe, and also globally. We offer several educational programs for graduate students and young professionals, including a master's degree program at Charles University, which we co-sponsor, as well as our annual NATO Summer School and Cybersecurity Academy. Our most prominent research and policy endeavors involve the emerging risks and threats to the transatlantic alliance and other partners globally in the economic and financial and outer space domains. We also conduct security-minded research concerning disinformation and the Western Balkans. With respect to the economic and financial statecraft, PSSI was recently recognized by the UK's prestigious Prospect magazine as the world's leading think tank in this policy portfolio for its original work in uncovering and analyzing China's malign use of global capital markets, particularly the exchanges of the United States and Europe. So I guess that's for a brief overview of what we do.
Absolutely, and it's absolutely impressive, and I'm so grateful that we have the chance to dig on a few topics or into your work. So, what are, in your opinion, the key trends in space security at large and the implication of, unfortunately, the unprovoked war against the Ukraine, as we have seen?
So I'll start with the key trends. I'd say more dependency, more commercial, and more diversified. Space-based services have become an integral part of life in most of the developed world. Moreover, we're clearly witnessing a rapid increase in commercial capabilities, and a growing number of nations are seeking to acquire space-derived benefits and indigenous capabilities for both civil and military uses. In this connection, the European Space Policy Institute has indicated that there are currently 82 countries with at least one satellite in orbit. And then the government's space sector spending in 2021 globally was $92 billion, a 50% increase since 2015. This dynamic environment also creates opportunities for new international partnerships, networking opportunities within the space industry, and brings, frankly, pressing security challenges as well. I think it's fair to say that the global counterspace dynamic, that is the capabilities that can be used to disrupt, deny, degrade, or destroy space systems, is primarily driven by the terrestrial rivalries among the major space powers. Although a lot of political attention has recently been given to the destructive anti-satellite capabilities, the gray zone spectrum of threats is worrisome, as well as there are no accepted deterrence regimes currently in place to address these low intensity hostility activities. With regard to the implications of the conflict in Ukraine, I think that three critical items stand out. The overly ambitious scale of Russia's military aggression and its poor performance on the battlefield to date, the indispensability of space assets in the conflict, and the use of economic and financial tools by the West for both penalties and deterrence. We've experienced GPS jamming by Russian forces even prior to the invasion around November 2021. Since the commencement of hostilities, we've witnessed a multifaceted cyber attack against Viasat satellite modems in Ukraine and elsewhere in Europe, and Russia's jamming of Starlink services. Added to this are the irresponsible and menacing statements by the Roscosmos head Dmitry Rogozin, and the abrupt halt to Moscow's space collaboration with the West, together with the Western sanctions against Russian companies. These are but some of the most visible symptoms of a major and unwelcome shift in space diplomacy, predictability, and global commercial and governmental cooperation. The private sector has had a significant role to play in shaping the conflict on the ground and will only grow in significance in the post-war space environment. Products and services offered by commercial space companies are especially relevant to military planning and execution, as well as documenting deliberate attacks on the civilian population for later war crime dossier. I mean, companies like Maxar, HE360, and others.
When we move forward to or look on another level, our topic today is the wider the economic and financial dimension of space security. I mean, you mentioned before, we have seen now really these trends and opportunities for the space market. Also, what we've seen in the Ukraine with Elon providing Starlink terminals. Maxar is feeding more or less everyone, including the mainstream media, with the pictures. So let's narrow the financial and economic dimension more to the space security. What are these dimensions from your analytics?
Yes, thanks, Torsten. Looking again at the current war against Ukraine, the Allies have opted for arming Ukraine and the imposition of economic and financial sanctions as their substitute for a direct military confrontation with Russian forces. This single statement of fact, I think, tells much of the story. In the space sector, I recently heard on a Czech podcast a phrase that, quote, "We're witnessing live the suicide of the Russian space sector," unquote. That too struck me as a pretty accurate statement. There are two aspects of the economic and financial domain that we've carefully examined in relation to space security. First, the economic and financial domain can serve as a major new source of leverage in Allied efforts to respond credibly to irresponsible and malevolent behavior in space. And second are the risks or threats stemming from Chinese and Russian space activities abroad in this domain. Specifically, we examine how these authoritarian regimes deploy predatory economic and financial practices to bolster their strategic space power. China, and to a much lesser degree Russia, employ their state-owned enterprises to build seemingly benign commercial space partnerships to achieve outsized strategic influence abroad. For example, take the Pacific Islands. They care deeply about the region's climate-related challenges, making GNSS and Earth observation services extremely important. We examine circumstances stemming from the provision of such services by China as opposed to other partners. The Solomon Islands recently signed a security agreement with China, which has properly caused serious concern within the AUKUS alliance due to the likely enhancement of China's power projection capabilities. Interestingly, in 2020, the Solomon Islands government was awarded a $100 billion loan from Beijing shortly after the country switched its diplomatic ties from Taiwan to the mainland. China uses similar bribery-oriented, if you will, techniques in space. Good examples include countries like Sri Lanka or Nigeria. In short, China bundles strategic software with the space infrastructure hardware for a blend which is very, very detrimental to the independence and sovereignty of the recipient countries.
So are these, on that note, are countries like China and others are, I would call it in favor, but use the war and the world attention on this war for expanding their influence? I mean, we have seen shortly after the war started the strikes of the Turkish Air Force in North Syria, in North Iraq. So, can you observe that as well, or is it just something where I put one and one together and that's not even two?
Probably what I would say that this is a longer trend, which it's just, I would say that it has taken our part of the world to realize the underlying consequences and the underlying motives, because this has only came into view, let's say a few years back. So I would not say that they are using the situation right now, but obviously there are lots of lessons that we can learn in terms of, what does that mean for them proceeding forward, and in what fashion.
On that note, what is a real partnership? And I mean now obviously in a geopolitical context, from your analytics.
Yes, a very good question. First, let's start with what a partnership should not look like, specifically a non-transparent approach to bilateral space cooperation and unfair trade practices designed to create debilitating dependencies on the part of the recipient countries. These predatory practices, including large-scale subsidized financing, also tend to lead to political extortion, particularly with regard to the shaping of global behavioral norms and standards. Moreover, such behavior, it distorts the space economy and binds recipient countries to Beijing and Moscow via sole source space contracts and other means. Now we can turn to what international space partnerships should look like, those based on free markets and democratic principles, in my view. Mm-hmm. The watchwords here are transparency, disclosure, accountability, proper risk management, good corporate governance, reciprocity, respect for sovereignty, and the rule of law. Only then can the recipient country properly assess any risks, any material risks involved for them, and ensure that external space assistance is affordable, sustainable to them, and politically prudent.
So, for me, it's a bit hard to phrase this question, but have we, maybe even Germany, done a mistake, or either Europe did a mistake in trusting Russia too much over the last years and haven't heard the signs? If they have been, I mean, Crimea was obviously a sign, Georgia, yeah, you name it, but have we chosen the wrong partners?
Well, I always say it's easy to point fingers after the fact, but I'd say the reality of, let's say, the dependencies has already been used back in the 1980s during the Reagan administration. You may remember that in the 1980s, Europe and the United States have been a big spat over whether to stop the second strand of the Siberian gas pipeline, which eventually materialized, which was later known as Nord Stream 2. So this discussion about dependencies, as if we talk about the energy sector in particular, that's not something that's very new. And we could say that there have been a lot of warning signs. So I would definitely say a diversification is always a good idea, which is now everybody's trying to do that.
Okay. And I don't want to talk about Nord Stream 2 here now. So, but
no.
No, not as a German, no. We have questions, as mentioned before, from our wonderful audience. So Valentin asks, if the dependence in space services of the global well-being is significant, is the world, and especially Europe, doing something on the resilience side?
Yes. So let's see. I believe so. I believe that there has been a lot that is being done with regard to create a greater resiliency, but the issue is more resiliency only doesn't ensure space security, if you will. So you need all the pieces together. So resiliency is only one part of it. I mentioned earlier in our discussion deterrence, right? Even if you have the greatest resilient satellite, there will always be the ability to somehow, let's say, disrupt the service or even disable it in one way or another. So resiliency is important in making it harder to achieve that. But then if we don't have the second piece, the deterrence piece, and actually, frankly, general understanding what are the norms that people should abide by, those that actually enter the space faring world and operate assets, then we're going to be in trouble anyway. So I think, I think that's the big effort now, to put all the pieces together.
Okay. Let's move on. Your institute, and we mentioned it before, conducts unique research and policy advocacy in the sector. So what especially do you do? So how can I imagine that?
So PSSI has developed significant data and analysis with regard to the nexus of the economic, finance, and space security, as I mentioned. Specifically, we're able to, through open source research, identify and analyze significant Chinese and Russian space-related transactions globally to assess the exposure of targeted countries to the threat of partial or complete what we call space sector capture. In terms of volume, we're talking about some 300 Chinese and Russian transactions in 83 countries currently. As indicated earlier, their signature approach is so-called package deals of design, manufacturing, launch, operations, personnel training, and oftentimes 100% subsidized financing of space infrastructure. We identify at least 21 such package deals in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and also in Europe. Countries as diverse as Belarus, Bolivia, Indonesia, and Egypt are involved. Many of the financing contracts contain the no Paris Club clauses, that is, they're independent and separate from those stated in agreements with other creditors. The China Development Bank or Exim Bank contracts often contain ominous cross-default clauses and the ability to seize key space infrastructure as collateral in the event of delayed payments. PSSI also monitors the list of Chinese and Russian space entities operating internationally that are on various sanctions lists of the United States and or Japan. Perhaps not surprisingly, the Chinese companies that facilitate international space partnerships are often operating under official US or other allied sanctions because of various national security or human rights abuses. I think this fact alone raises several questions. For example, what are the implications of sanctioned space companies on the development of proper and sustainable space commerce governance? How should prospective recipient countries account for them in their risk calculus when considering space-related cooperation or partnering arrangement? So these are among the issues that we're looking into.
And you have clients for that, so you're not just doing it for the research. You do that for your clients. Is that correct? A correct assumption?
Right. I mean, in the think tank context, we don't talk about our partners as clients, but yes, we have somebody who consumes us research, and probably important to say, we don't do it for the research itself. I mean, we seek to do policy advocacy, such as during the conferences, but also roundtables. Recently, we held a closed roundtable just on this topic in relation to the Europe Indo-Pacific partnership. So we were, as you know, Indo-Pacific encompasses a large part of the world. And we were looking at how does it look like in the space sector in this particular region. And so we're basically engaging decision makers and increasingly, frankly, also the industry, because they're an important part of this equation.
Mark has a wonderful question that fits in perfectly here while talking about your research. So, will the space station have a future, and can we divide the technical side from the political problems?
Right. So, the International Space Station has been a very prominent and even the main example of internationalism, right? We have had for 2 decades a very good collaboration among the partners. And what is happening now just will require obviously an adjustment. But moving a project as the ISS in a different direction requires time. So, in terms of meaning, does it have a future or not? It will probably continue until that time, as the partners will configure the next options. There is an advocacy to obviously terminate the relationship with Russia, but I'm sure that much more competent people on this topic are now deliberating on that. So in the future, the question is, will there be another collaborative project, or will there be independent space stations by different space powers?
Yeah, I mean, we see it with China today. We see the commercial stations, the activities, and I mean, we see it now in such a fast speed developing. I mean, it's quite breathtaking. So, but we have to see what happens with the ISS. So I'm pretty concerned about it, I have to say. I know. Well, I remember that back in 2019, when I had the great honor to attend your high level, which was the 5th PSSI Space Security Conference, your institute highlighted the challenge of strategic competition for international space partnerships. Can you elaborate on that and where we are with that today?
Yes, thank you, Torsten. I'd say that there's much greater awareness of the strategic nature of the Chinese, for example, Belt and Road Initiative and its space iterations, such as the Space Information Corridor or the Polar Silk Road. A number of the troubling trends and realities that I've already mentioned have come to clearer view. What we have uncovered is a kind of we call it ground-based space race with authoritarian space powers that the allies didn't even know they were engaged in. And I don't think many still don't know. We still have a long way to go in trying to configure a comprehensive response and avoid stovepiping of this issue area, or frankly, the feeling that it's somebody else's job. The fact is that it's quite urgent that we protect the space domain from these predatory practices and set appropriate governance principles.
On that note, it's another question I'm hard to ask. So, but did or does Europe choose their partners carefully with, I mean, taking all into account what you have said before?
Right. generally, it's a good idea to seek partnerships with countries that share the same value systems. Let's start here. While it's important to engage other, more non-traditional partners, a nation doesn't want to find itself in a position of weakness that can be exploited. So it's a complex issue, of course, such as the recent developments we just talked about with regard to the International Space Station or the ExoMars mission. I think another important lesson here is that even a civilian mission needs to take into careful consideration the geopolitical motives and impulses at play. And I think that has always been the case, but I think it's much more prominent now.
Okay, I don't want to dig into that further. One point on that remark, on that note, not remark, is, would you say that we see at the moment the end of space diplomacy, at least towards Russia?
On the contrary, I would say this is an opportunity to for a rebirth of space diplomacy, where the urgency, I think, brings it a greater opportunity. So we just have to be very careful how we tread the waters. But I would say that it will require a reassessment, and we definitely should not operate under thinking that we can go on with any kind of status quo policies that we have devised.
Okay, I love that. So I try to keep this optimism also on my side alive. Next month, in June, 19th to 21st, you will be hosting the next edition of the PSSI Space Security Conference. What will be then the half dozens, the sixth. So would you like to talk about that and tell us what are the goals and how does that conference differentiate from all the other stuff what we see in the space sector now, again, popping up, week by week. So what is the biggest difference?
So I guess I would say that our differentiator is that in an unclassified setting, we bring together the leading space security experts, senior civil and military officials, as well as select industry representatives from Europe, the United States, and Japan. I think that there are not a lot of fora that combine all these different stakeholders, if you will. We'll be discussing the current status of the space threat. We're going to obviously talk about space domain awareness, a sustainable architecture for international space cooperation. We're going to talk about cross-domain deterrence, where we are and how we can strengthen the concept. We're also going to talk about if we are the global leaders, what are the requirements to maintain this global leadership going forward. As in the past, Japan will figure prominently in these proceedings, this time with Mr. Yasuyuki Kasai, Director General of the National Space Policy Secretariat, who will share a Japanese perspective on a number of these issues. We also have a number of other prominent speakers, such as the Czech Foreign Minister, Mr. Lipovsky, Czech Deputy Minister of Defense for Industrial Cooperation, Mr. Kopečný, Karin Claes, from the Special Envoy from the European External Action Service, Rodrigo da Costa from ESPI, which you had recently on your show, and also distinguished military representatives such as Major General Michel Friedling or Major General Trout, as well as Lieutenant General Saltzman. So we have a high-level representation from US Space Commands who will talk about the Allied collaboration. And there are a number of other distinguished experts. So if you go on our website, Space Conference website, spacesecurity.eu, you can see the list of the speakers. And this is, it's an open invitation only event, but if you're interested and you are from Europe, US or Japan, please do reach out to me, and we'd be pleased to include you.
We will put the link in our thank you email, and then also in the recap, of course. So one last question I would like to take from Christophe from the audience. Deterrence also matters beyond orbit, cislunar space, moon, and beyond. When dealing with China and Russia, how do we combine realist deterrence doctrine with idealist, peaceful, and sustainable governance intentions, in particular with regards to weaponization of space?
Right. So
I promised you our engaged audience.
Right, wonderful. And I see that you left the easiest questions as last. So thank you for that. And, I think I just mentioned cross-domain deterrence, right? So we definitely need that because we cannot look at space as a stovepipe domain. And we talk about economics and finance. There is that great potential because going forward, we want to emphasize some kind of sustainable global space commerce. That means also going beyond the Earth's orbit, cislunar and beyond. In order to do that, we have to start here, down on the Earth. Who are the companies doing the business? Are they following international law? Are they following the WTO and other practices, which the benefits of these organizations they derive? I think we have to go to these fundamentals, and if we are able to devise policies, to strengthen compliance with these international regimes that we already have, I think that's going to go a long way in helping us devise also, shall we say, the deterrence or the punishment side of the equation.
Great. Thank you very much. Our 33 minutes are over, and my internet connection here coming in and out. So I thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing you in Prague then next month and being part of the and looking forward to that. And with that, I'm handing back to Chiara to tell us more about what we have planned for the next weeks beside the Prague event, which is not even on this list here. So.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It was really, really interesting to listen into your conversation. And before everyone leaves for today, we have some really exciting events coming up in the next weeks as well. So on the 10th of May, we'll have our 33 minutes with Nicole Thalhofer of the BDLI, the German Aerospace Industries Association. Just a day later, on the 11th of May, we'll have the next Space Cafe Young Global Talents, hosted by me and my guest Rolf Denzing, on the topic of space debris. And then on the 12th of May, we'll have the next Space Cafe Germany by the wonderful Andreas Schepers, who will be talking to Dr. Holger Krag of also VISA, and this will be in German. On the 17th of May, just a week later, we'll have our 33 minutes with Amna Alois on courts of space. And on the 19th of May, early morning, 9:30 a.m. CEST, we'll have our next Space Law Breakfast with Stephen Freeland. All events are going to be online on Eventbrite, as always. And as always, we love to hear your feedback, so please check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Don't forget to sign up for our daily and our biweekly newsletters. And if you want to treat yourselves to something special, become a Space Watcher today or help us out in the Supporter program. Again, big thank you to Jana for the inspiring and insightful talk and for being our guest. And thanks to the entire team behind the scenes for doing that great job week in and week out. I hope that you all stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being so engaged, for asking so many questions. It's always wonderful to see, and hopefully see you in the next weeks. In the meantime, visit our website, follow us on social media, and don't forget, become a space watcher. Thank you.